Thank you so much, Dawn, and all of you for coming. We are just thrilled to be here and grateful that we have an audience that wants to learn what we've learned and finds value in the work that we've done. We feel it is a calling, and nobody's making us do this, but we really want to provide a service for people that is helpful and that will help change the trajectory that we are on. And doing the same old is not going to get us there. So the times call for a distinct switch or transition in our approach so that we can hopefully bring things back to where they should be.
Yes, and so we've kind of formulated this approach, and we just call it breaking down bad bills. This is what we have decided to do as our contribution to the legislative session. There are so many bills, we'll talk about that, but there are so many bills, and then after the dust settles, after a legislative session, we're sitting here wondering, Utah passed what? Or we think Utah passed this, but then we find out later that really Utah didn't pass anything worth bragging about. And so why is that? And so we're going to talk about that. So we'll get into our mission, our philosophy, the mechanics of a bill, the different bad bill tags that we created to help people quickly identify the bad elements of a bill. And then we have a few samples of bad bills, and then we'll just open it up to a Q&A at that point. But we'd like to start or finish our presentations with Ephesians 6:12-13.
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. And that's the crux of our philosophy, is that what we are up against is way bigger than any of us, and the only way to overcome it is with God's help. And so we recognize we are completely dependent on Him, and we give Him all the credit, all the glory, and we just want to be right before Him, and seeking truth and going wherever it leads us is our primary objective. And if that makes us enemies, that makes us enemies. But as long as we can answer a clear conscience to God, we're happy.
Okay, so the legislative session is 45 days, and our affectionate term for it is death by 1,000 paper cuts. We have so far, we're only 28 days into this session. We have over 800 pieces of legislation so far. So that's the House bills, HB, and then the number, the Senate bills, SB, the number, and then the House resolutions, and then you have the Senate resolutions, and then they have these joint resolutions. And so it gets really hairy after a while. And it feels like for us, we are more concerned about the bad bills than we are necessarily the good bills. And it's not to say that good bills don't make a difference. They can make a world of difference. The problem is we have to sort through this haystack, right? And that's how they get by so much stuff. It's just they overwhelm us. And when they overwhelm they overwhelm the system, and they overwhelm us as citizens who are just trying to follow along and keep up with everything. So this is a real problem, and then we would love to see the legislature enact some limiting principles where they dial it back. You look at one single legislator and it's something like 10?
Oh, there's some that
12?
Have like 20, 30. It's really bad. And how can they possibly know everything that's in their bills? And some of them are, they're the chair of a committee and it's a committee bill. And so they use that as the excuse that, they can't possibly know all of their own bills. But really, there's no excuse. If you're going to run a bill, you better know it, and you better understand what it does and what it doesn't do, and not just go by the sales pitch of whoever presented the bill to you to run.
Yeah, a lot of times people love the idea of a bill. That sounds great. This bill is pitched this way, like we're going to get women or men out of women's dorms. But when you actually look at the language, you sit back and say, I don't think that does what the bill is advertising it does.
Right.
So Our philosophy, as far as when we point out, hey, this is a bad bill, we believe that we have to bring accountability, and we have to be accountable.
Yes, we are accountable to, first, the truth. Second, the people that, we're going to be very careful not to put out information that we have not thoroughly researched and understand. We're not just going to make wild claims like a lot of organizations do without actually having done the research. We also want the legislators to be accountable to the people, not to their stakeholders, not to the lobbyists, those people that ask them to run all these bills, their partners in crime. We want our legislators to be accountable to the principles in the Constitution. Like, that seems so obvious, but it gets so forgotten in the whirl of all the crazy that happens up there. That just goes completely by the wayside most of the time. And most of all, accountable to God. Because we believe that legislators, as well as ourselves, will be accountable to Him for what we do on this earth, including the votes that we make, or the legislators, their votes. They will be accountable for those.
Yes, and all of this is to protect against subversion and from being blindsided. Like, it's not good if our faith, our family, and our freedom gets totally turned on its head, flipped on its head, or ignored or pushed off to the side. These are the primary things that we would like legislators to keep in mind, and this is why we're trying to also bring accountability with this approach, where we are saying this is a bad bill and this is why, and not just having the accountability on the front end, because a lot of times these bills are foregone conclusions. They have already decided the bills will pass. They've twisted arms. They meet in their little legislative caucuses, and they have it there. And we've heard from legislators up there who say they just go around and they take this kind of straw vote before a really big bill that legislative leadership has decided is going to go through. And then the pressure's on. You don't want to be one of those who votes no when everybody's saying, oh, you have to vote yes, because if you vote no on a bill that everybody is supposed to be in unison on, right, then that jeopardizes your chances of getting your bills out of, say, Rules Committee. It jeopardizes your chance of anybody voting for your bills. And so you feel kind of like, as a legislator, like, well, I want my stuff to go through, so I'm going to vote for this other stuff, even if it's not in the best interest of and people.
And we have not been in the legislature. We're talking as if we have, but we have talked to people within that have told us this is how it operates. And it creates a really hostile environment. But so this is kind of the check marks that you see are what we are looking for, right? Or what we believe. There is no right way to do something wrong. Like, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And you can't, there's no way to make it right. So how you get there matters. That's the integrity. One of our audience members was just telling me about something she read from way back when, in the 1800s, somebody ran for president, a famous person. You might recognize his name in our culture. But he ran for president, and one of his slogans was "Make America, make integrity great again." Right? That's what we are lacking, and that's what we need to restore. We also need to question the premise of everything. Okay, we're not, they don't want us to assume bad intent. They want us to assume good intent. That's how they train legislators and people within the state, so that you never question what they're doing. Always assume good intent. They don't want to be called out. But that's exactly what we need to do. That's what critical thinking is and requires of us. So always we need to question the premise of, where did this idea come from? Why are they doing this? Who's behind it, etc. And then we don't want to stop until we've discovered the whole elephant. Okay? When you read a bill, you've got to read not just the title or the general description, because those can be misleading. They do that intentionally, thinking people are lazy and they're not going to read the whole thing. And you may get halfway down and think, okay, I think I get what this is. If you start reading the bill, you've got to read to the very last line, because that's often where those rotten Easter eggs are hidden. So you've got to not just, touch the elephant's trunk or it's tell and think you know what the elephant is. You have got to really do your homework and discover the whole elephant.
Okay, so we're about those things, but we're also not about other things. We hear this time and time again from legislators, from policymakers, we just have to, we can't get everything we want at once. So just be happy with a little bit, and, we'll just make little steps. Baby steps is how we win it back. Well, baby steps, in our opinion, is how we lost it in the first place.
And how we keep losing it.
And how we continue to keep losing it. And a lot of people are not familiar with the Hegelian dialectic. It's that idea of, like, you have this side and then you have that side. And usually, let's just call them left and right. You have the right and the left, and they come into conflict. And usually, in order to create that conflict, diversity is introduced. And so that's one component that a lot of people aren't maybe aware of, but they introduce something that kind of that acts as a catalyst for that conflict, and usually it's diversity. And then, so now you're at different odds, right? And there is some tension there. This side's pulling this way, this side's pulling this way. The left has been amazingly successful at always pulling the right just a little bit over this way. Look, you're not losing a whole lot, and you're helping us gain a little bit, so it's not so bad for you. But that is how you shift what's called the Overton window. And now suddenly you've moved from over here all the way over here. You know how people say, well, I never left the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me. And that's kind of like how it is. The ground is shifting underneath us. So settling for incrementalism, when you can really just be bold and courageous and go after when you fight a battle, you're not ever going to say, well, I'll be happy if we get a foot. No, when you fight a battle, you want to win the whole thing. We need to have that same mindset. We're not about disagreeing better. People have also come to us and said, oh, the problem is the way you say it. Like you're calling people's bills bad. That's really mean.
So offensive.
It's super offensive.
I take it really personally.
Well, what's funny is, yeah, you may not like that we're calling it bad, but go deeper, please. And please know that what we're saying is bad about this bill is objectively bad. And we'll talk about those things. And then finally, we're really not about approval seeking. It doesn't. For him. Yes, except from up high. It is. I'm sorry if you don't like it. We're here we're not more afraid of man than we are of God. So we'll just keep on going our route. And so we don't get invited to the little fancy parties. I guess we'll live, maybe we'll get some sleep that night. And so it's not a big deal for us. So we talked about the legislative mechanics. And so when we break down a bill, we look at these different parts of how a bill becomes a law. And then we also have to think about, what makes a bill unbreakable. But we're not going to dwell in depth as too much on these areas. But let's just talk about each one briefly.
Yeah, so the provenance is where a bill came from, where the idea originated, who came up with the idea, who introduced it to the legislature or the legislator to run the bill. Is it a national or global agenda? These are things we look for. Are other states running this? And how did these model legislative bills do in these other states? Where did they fail? Why did they fail? So the provenance is really important. It tells you a lot about the ideology behind a bill and if it's moving us more to a more liberal place or a more conservative constitutional place. So then you have the process that a bill goes through up at the legislature, from starting in the Rules Committee and being assigned to the House or the Senate and what committee, and that process, but also the process that the legislature uses to sell a bill, the politicking behind it, how they rally support, how they use the grassroots to push what they want and make it look like it's the people that want it. And we're just doing what the people want, right? But often that is very orchestrated. And you have to know who's in whose ear, telling who to do what, right? And who to create the rally among the people to get a bill passed. You've also got the substance of the bill. What does it actually say? And what do those words actually mean, and what do they do? Because you can't just go by, you know, the little talking points or the slogans about what they want you to think, because the system is all about elevating your ignorant assumptions. And they will take advantage of that endlessly. And it's really easy to do because most people have not studied. They don't know the context of, you know, what's happening in this space and the specific language that's used in these different areas of policy making. Every area, just like every industry, has their own lingo. You've got to know the specific lingo for that specific policy area. Do you want to go ahead with those?
Yeah, sure. So just to tack on to what Natalie said there, in education specifically, the language is a moving target. As we mentioned before, we have lots of moving targets, but language is constantly evolving, and they're constantly kind of hijacking good words that we think mean good things, but they mean something entirely different in the education field, entirely different. And they've like blown it up into a science in and of itself. So the way we like to explain it to people is, you know, we're using the same words, but we're not speaking the same language. It's like the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, they will, those in the system that don't want to follow a bill, if a good bill happens to pass, they will take what's in that good bill and they will make it mean what they want it to mean. So even if you get a good bill passed, doesn't mean you can lay down and go to sleep and think all is well. You have to remain vigilant and watchful.
Yeah. And so the application is where the rubber meets the road. It's no longer policy on paper, it is policy in practice. And so a lot of times these bills originate with activists, they get written by activists, and then it's activists who get to apply the bill. So we can look at it with our good intentions and say, boy, that sounds great. It'll be people like us who will be the ones who will be applying the law. And in reality, more often than not, especially in education, it is not. Right. So, yeah.
Well, and to that point, the legislative drafters are often the ones that write this, and they are elevated, or they get advanced to that position. Like there's been people, policy writers at the state board that have been advanced to the to be a legislative drafter because they've proven how good they can write as far as their craftiness, right? And so they get elevated and they pretend to be neutral, but they're not. They are activists, and they coordinate with the people in that field, like behind the scenes, to make sure that it gets written in a way that those in the system are happy with. A legislator usually will go to a drafter and say, I want a bill that will do this, or my constituents are concerned with this, and the drafters will put something together for them and say, here, this does what you want it to do. And the legislator often believes that it does what the drafter told them it does, not knowing that there's all of this. If ever there was a science, it's in crafting language, and it's a nefarious science.
I thought last year we were talking about, somebody was talking about in the legislature of having a bill that made it so that we know, well, maybe it was the lawyers, that the people that actually look through the bill once it's created, to look and see who finances them, who's paying them to do that, because let's face it, everything goes back to money, pretty much, that's what it does. Because then you would know, oh, well, we're going to really watch this one, because I guess we have to watch them all.
Yeah.
I don't think anything happened with that, because it's like, voting to not pay congressmen more money. They're not going to vote for anything like that. But that's scary, because you just don't know who those people are.
Yeah.
I don't think they have any for anything other than what they get paid to do, probably.
Well, and a lot of bills, at least in education, force the system to adopt new programs and policies that require them to apply for grants. And those grants come with all the strings attached. Yeah. So
let's talk about enforcement now. Sometimes when a bill, the enforcement is supposed to be the remedies section of a bill. So this is to make sure, like, if the bill is not followed, what next? What else? What happens then? And so there are two types of enforcement. You have either not good enforcement, which is enforcement with no teeth. It's empty threats, essentially. Or you have actual enforcement where, hey, if somebody breaks a law, there are real, and I think, real consequences that are truly actionable, that aren't going to put an extra burden on the person who's being violated by the breaking of the law. Too often we see it's no enforcement, and yet that's supposed to be a critical component of bills. And Natalie and I are coming at this not just from the perspective of having worked on policy at the State Board of Education. Natalie was up there for 4 years as a state board member, and I helped her craft some policy along these lines of, trying to help children and trying to put teeth into things. But we have also been involved in this bill making process from the provenance all the way up into the enforcement. And we had a bill that went through successfully in 2023.
No small miracle.
It was no small miracle, and it really was. It was a wonderful thing. We feel like God was pushing it along the whole way. We did everything we could, and then He filled in the gaps for us. But that bill was HB 348. It's informally known as the Rights of Conscience Bill, but its proper title is Waivers of Participation, I believe.
Yes, and that was from
amendments.
2023, if you want to look it up. 53G 10205 is the code number.
Yeah, and we've gotten wonderful, amazing feedback from organizations, First Amendment, legal organizations from across the country that say this is amazing. This is amazing work. This is the type of bill that other states should be doing, and we don't take credit for that. We just feel like we were put in the right place at the right time to do the right thing, so we're grateful for that opportunity. So let's talk about, we already talked about the mechanics of a bill, the provenance, process, substance, application, and enforcement. Let's talk about our bad bill tags. So this is something we came up with. We're going to go over each of these really quickly individually, but these are just little categories that we can say, hey, this bit of language falls into this category. And these are warning signs that a bill is bad. We will be putting all these tags up on our website when we get a moment.
Well, and if you don't understand what we're talking about with tags, we look at the actual language of the bill and then we highlight the sections and we put a tag on it. So people can see with their own eyes the language in the bill, what we're talking about. And they can learn how to read a bill with that critical eye, so to not let things slip through going forward, because there's so many bills and we're just two people. We can't possibly read all the bills. We need everybody to know how to do this. And that's why we are making these tags available on our website, so as you're reading through, you can start using these tags when you're going through a bill and helping others see what you're seeing. And if you do that, feel free to share with us, and we can add it to our bad bill tracker if you find egregious ones.
And we feel already that it's been very helpful. We've gotten great feedback from people who said, oh, thank you. Now I can just say it's this, and I don't have to search for the words necessarily, because it applies to not just education bills, but it can apply to election bills. It can apply to any sort of government operations bills, family, et cetera.
Just gives you simple layman's terms to explain why this is a problem. So the first one, we'll go through them really quick. Spending spree bill. It increases spending or wastes taxpayer money. We've seen lots of examples of that on the national level as well. And we could do the same here in Utah, because we are just wasting. If you've ever been to an appropriations meeting, it's just all the stuffed suit penguins marching in to get their, money grubbing, to get their piece of the pie. Everybody wants money for their pet projects and their industry.
And people can even put in appropriations requests without a bill. So they can just approach the appropriations committee and say, I would like money for X or Y or Z. And they can just request it.
So much money to crazy things that you would be like, why am I paying for this with my tax dollars?
So a globalist bill pushes anti-American agendas. They hurt faith, family, or freedom. Globalism is a real phenomenon. You have people who are trying to break down all the borders and create kind of like this big oligarchy, you could say, where nation states are purely pro forma, and we don't have it's not like we have a unique identity at that point anymore, because we're just doing what the rest of the world is doing. And who's deciding what the rest of the world is doing? Some very elite people at the top. And they have very clear anti-American agendas. And we're seeing these through multiple organizations in education, specifically the World Economic Forum, the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Which the governor has his own version of that for Utah that is just like a little branch, the little child of the big child, the parent organization. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education and Science and Cultural Organization, and so on and so on. We could spend all day.
So then you have the split the baby bill, which makes bad compromises or sacrifices what is right for convenience. Oftentimes, this is the total annihilation of a good bill, and yet people on both sides will vote for it because they both got something. But if we got something, then you can be sure that the other side got something that undermines or at least makes it so it's something we don't want. It's something our side would never want, but we had to let them have that to get what we wanted. That makes it for a really bad bill.
Yeah. Unconstitutional bills violate inalienable rights or usurp authority. We see this all the time. It happens more often than not, and it's sad because this is the one oath that our elected officials take to support, obey, and defend the Constitution, and yet it's the first document that gets stepped on.
Including Utah's Constitution.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. Then you have the fox guarding the hen house bill that entrusts a state or a private entity or an individual to police itself, which makes for really lousy enforcement or no enforcement.
Yeah. A Band-Aid bill slaps a very superficial fix on a complex problem. It doesn't stop the bleeding. We have a real problem here in Utah with illegal immigration, and it's overwhelming the schools. There's only one bill in the entire pantheon of bills introduced this year that is intended to deal with that, and all it does is provide resources and training for teachers who are going to teach students who are learning English. Now, it doesn't say they have to actually learn English.
Or teach them English.
Or teach them English. So that's what we would call a Band-Aid bill.
Yes. And then you have the camel's nose bill that introduces big change incrementally, often through pilot programs. And that can happen, one bill 1 year or a series of bills year after year after year to get them to where they have their agenda completely brought in piecemeal so that people don't know that it's happening.
Yeah. A blank check bill explicitly gives an entity free rein to act beyond listed limitations. So it's so funny. They'll say the state board must do A, B, C, D. And then E is, and anything else the state board needs to do. That is a blank check clause right there. It's like, oh, why did you even list A, B, C, D, and E in the first place?
And then you have the omnibus bill, which we all know, it packs varied topics together, forcing an all or nothing vote. So it's really hard for a legislator to vote against it if there's something good in it, because then they can be vilified for voting against the one good thing.
Trojan horse bill, it seems really good on the surface, but it hides some very nasty surprises inside. So, beware of gifts, right? Born by Greeks. And we see a lot of these as well. And we'll be talking about a few of those tonight.
Yeah, and then your stay in your lane bill, it does things that aren't the proper role of government. It's kind of like the constitutional one, but or it allows a government agency to do things that aren't within their lane. Like in education, they're constantly usurping the role of the family.
Yeah, and these are often extra legal things. They may not be illegal, they're just extra legal. A shaky foundation bill tries to build something good, but it's building it on existing weak or bad code. So they'll say, oh yeah, we're going to do something that'll help parents not have to always turn in a certain form. Okay, that's great, but there are other pieces underneath that you could have fixed. You could, as long as you're opening that piece of code, why not go in and fix all the other stuff that makes it really difficult for parents? And so we see a lot of that as well.
And then your dumpster fire bill, where it's just like, hot mess from beginning to end. It creates more heat than it does light. It sometimes acts as a distraction to other bills they're trying to sneak in, or it's one that creates a lot of chaos also, which provides cover as well, oftentimes.
Now, it's hard to redeem these ones. Red tape bill, it grows or insulates state power via layers of bureaucracy, regulation, personnel, or language. And this is just kind of building up the machine, right? And so a red tape bill, all it does is add to the machine. Oh, now you're going to have a commission. Now you're going to have a task force. Now you're going to bring in all these outside parties. And then, you know, government has already metastasized to a really bad level at that point.
Okay, then you have
Did I go back? Sorry.
Yeah. Public-private partnership bill, which is fascism, right? It puts the state in bed with special interests or unelected, unaccountable parties, often industry, those that government wants to do favors for, picking the winners and losers. Public-private partnerships are really dangerous, but they're very advantageous for businesses and the government, just not for the people and for our freedom and our liberty. If an entity or somebody in the private sector partners with the government, that's great for them because then they get all of this funding, right? They don't have to go beat the bushes for individual customers to buy their product. They just get like a state contract, and everybody in the state goes to them, whether they know it or not, via their tax dollars, right? And it also is beneficial for the government because the private entities can do for the government what the government itself is not allowed to do. And so that's why so many countries go towards communism and socialism, because nobody wants to call it out. Those people in the private sector, the powerful, influential people in our society are often caught up in this, and so they're not going to call out the bad because they're benefiting from it.
So a social engineering bill uses junk science experiments, incentives, or ideologies to affect societal change. These are they're kind of like the Dr. Frankenstein parts of bills where they're like, well, you know, let's find out what happens if. And then they use a bill to make it happen. And it's just not a good idea. This is the stuff that creates cultural change that is often irreversible. And so there are kind of three different types of change that there are classifications for when it comes to shifting mindsets. And the first type of change is considered it's procedure change, and that's called first order change. And first order change is reversible. So you can change your procedures, you know, you can change the way you do something. But second order change is policy change, and that's intended to be irreversible. And this is why people say, well, you know, we just can't, we're doing it. We've been doing it for so long. It's everywhere in code. There's no way we're going to change it now. And that's second order change. They put so much into policy, and you're going to get a lot more heat for trying to pull it out than you are for just going along with it. And
or it's systems. They've created systems around it, and systems are interdependent with other systems like gears. Like, and you can't, if you pull one out, everything falls apart. And so that's why it's not reversible. Think about income tax. You know, how did we ever survive as a country before they implemented income tax? Could we ever go back to the way it was? Everything hinges on that. Everything rests on that. It'd be like pulling the foundation out, and everything would fall. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then the last type of change is third order change, and that's changing the culture. And so that is also intended to be irreversible. There is no going back.
That has to do with attitudes, values, beliefs, mindsets. That's where you can tear down that wall, like Reagan told Gorbachev, but you can't take the communism out of the people's minds once they've been indoctrinated. So you can take down DEI off of all the websites and pretend like, yeah, we took it away. We're not doing that anymore, but it's already in the minds and hearts of those teaching our kids, and in an entire generation now has been indoctrinated in it. So that's a problem.
Yeah.
So then you have the low blow bill. This exacts retribution or unnecessarily penalizes someone. This is a retaliation bill for somebody specific to somebody that made somebody at the legislature mad. And they're exacting retribution. And we've had several of those in the last few years. I have a bill that was written for me and a resolution. So I'm like, wow, okay, that's crazy. But like Aaron Davidson has one that's being run this year that is pure retaliation against him by Mike McKell. And because he noticed that Mike McKell didn't put a stamp on his ballot, his mail-in ballot. And now it literally has that in the code, that they can't do that. They can't look and see if there's a postage stamp on somebody's ballot. At least they can't acknowledge it.
Right.
If they happen to notice.
Yeah,
Can't make actual math calculations and like make decisions.
right?
It bothers the legislature.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Right, he was simply doing his job.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we know of more than a few of those. Natalie's just our most high-profile victim of the low blow bill. So,
was just doing their job too, right?
right, exactly.
Stuff was doing their job.
Exactly. So the easily hijacked bill opens the door to bad actors to take over a policy or program or subvert its intent. And this is just like for instance, the flag bill, HB 77. This is one where it's where they've since amended it. It's better. They've created a whole new substitute that is better. But initially, it was super easily hijacked. In other words,
Just plain ineffective.
yeah, it basically teachers could go in and say, because it prohibited all flags except for these types of flags, state flags, but then it said, oh, college flags are allowed too. Well, if you've ever seen pride-themed college flags,
They do these mashups between the
they
two.
do these mashups, and the intent of the bill was to take pride flags out of school. So this one is super easily hijacked, or it was until it got better. So,
So then you have the digital dependency bill, which enables excess use or toxic trust of tech systems, data collection, or AI, like the digital ID bill, or the app accountability bill that, makes parents think that it's going to keep their kids safe online when what it really does is it's going to require everybody to get a digital ID to prove that they're old enough to have access, just like the kids have to prove they're old enough to have access. Everybody has to prove that their age, and that brings in the digital ID.
and AI.
Or surveillance also.
Sorry. Yeah, so AI is one of really the most toxic and most destructive trends in education today. It's going to destroy the kids' minds. It's going to destroy education top to bottom. So it's just something you want to keep an eye out for. Exploitation bill uses others as tools for economic or social goals, or uses the ends to justify the means. We're seeing a lot of this as well. This is not a good thing, but a lot of the kids are being exploited through multiple bills that are going through the education committees like unanimously. And they mostly have to do with workforce bills, trying to get the kids into the workforce a lot earlier and put them into these workforce pipelines, find careers for them while they're babies, basically. Because somebody out there in career land, in the industry of, tech or bioengineering or whatever, says, we need 30,000 workers in the next 10 years. Utah schools, please make them for us. And so we see a lot of that right now.
There was something else where the schools were asking questions through the testing systems that they had, if your parents had guns, where they kept them.
Yes.
And things that were exploiting the privacy of their homes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are probably going to see more of that because we just had a firearms bill that looks like it's going to pass through the legislature, and it's about firearms education for all the kids. But if you look at a lot of what exists right now in terms of firearm education, it's all from the left. It's not about, there's not a word about your Second Amendment rights and how a firearm can be a protective tool, and how it's part of your God-given right to have one. It's like, oh, guns are so stinking dangerous. They are the worst things ever, guys.
But the thing is that when they bring it to the committee, they bring all of the parent rights people and tell them, oh, this is good, it's Second Amendment, right? This is our kids, we want them to be trained in firearm safety. So they all get up there and they give public comment in favor of the bill, not having researched the groups that are behind it and how they teach it. And so we do this so often that it's the conservatives that get the liberal bills passed, not realizing that that's what they're doing. So oftentimes when we are up at the legislature, you know, they'll have a committee hearing, they'll hear the bill, and then they'll ask for public comment, and they'll say, if you're for the bill, line up on this side. If you're against the bill, line up on this side. Well, that side is full of like trans people and like purple hair, you know, just interesting folks, radicals. And then here's all of our nice looking people. And yet we've done our research and we know it's a bad bill, but they're all of our friends are lined up to speak in favor of it. And we're like, do we go get in the against line? Because then we look like radicals, and we're not. But we are against this bill, but for very different reasons than those people. There really needs to be a third line that actually allows you to talk to the nuances of the bill and to say, you know, the intent is good, the execution is bad. How are we going to ensure that this doesn't get hijacked based on who's behind it? It looks like another one of those bills that will be hijacked. And they're using, I mean, if you just think about the last 30 years in Utah, where the Republicans have been the majority. And yet, look how far left we've gone in the last 30 years. And that's all on the Republicans. So that shows you very clearly what we're talking about, that we have a problem recognizing bad bills, and that's why we're doing this.
I spoke to a legislator, a newly elected senator up there on the Hill, and I said, is Utah more conservative now than we were like 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And he's all, oh, absolutely. We passed, like he looked at me like I was the crazy one, right? So this is where the gaslighting comes in. Absolutely. We passed a bill that made the state board of education partisan. That's what we did. We made the State Board of Education partisan.
Elected.
So meaning you elect Republicans and Democrats. Well, I just spent the past 4 years watching 12 of those Republicans gang up on the 13th Republican every single time the 13th Republican tried to put on the brakes on any of these crazy leftist agendas. Yeah. So, you know.
And the majority of the time, the Republicans vote with the Democrats. And that's what's happening up at the legislature. I heard, and I don't have the numbers, but I heard someone on the left doing an interview after after the governor's State of the State address. So it was on the news or wherever, where they were giving commentary afterwards. And he said that 80% of the bills they're voting together on up there.
Yeah. Linda, you had your hand up.
Yes, I want to know if is this one of the bills that we should be watching out to be?
I believe it's already passed. Has it gone all the way through?
I can look really quick, see where it's to at this point, but I think it already passed.
It's well on it, yeah. So this is Senator Lincoln Fillmore. This is devices in schools. It bans students' cell phones and other personal devices from school. So we want to make sure, because we believe this passed already, we want to make sure the public does not forget that this is what a bad bill looks like. And we're going to add to our, as the votes roll in, we're going to add the votes so that when people look up a bill, hopefully our website gets crawled as well. And people find out, oh, this is a bad bill and who voted for it. There needs to be accountability for these bad votes. This one, did it pass?
It passed the Senate, but it's still in the House. It hasn't gone to House committee yet.
Okay. So this is one you can talk to your legislators.
Okay, did you hear that? What's bad about it? It sounds good, right?
It sounds great, but we have had policies for regulating cell phones in our school districts for over a decade now. They're not new by any means. This isn't just cell phones, it's any emerging technology. So this isn't just a smartphone. So I, as a parent, go and I say to my daughter, hey, you get a dumb phone because you're lucky and your mom loves you, okay? So my daughter has a dumb phone where she doesn't get to do all this fancy stuff that all the other kids do. Her dumb phone is not allowed in the schools if this bill passes. It makes it basically illegal. She is breaking the law if she takes her dumb phone with her at school. Her dumb phone is not the same type of distraction that maybe some of these other things are, but it's all this can be including even a recording device. Now think of everything that the schools do not want the parents to know about. Like,
Yeah.
if you pass this flag bill that says you can't have basically pride flags in the schools, and the kid says, whoa, there's a mega pride flag hanging up in the restroom or something, right? How do you get the proof?
Do you see? So even the flag bill has a problem because if this passes, there's no way anybody will know that those flags are up there. So these are the kind of things we look at about how it actually plays out. Monica likes to call it running it through the scenario generator, right? Like, it doesn't, you just have to think about it for a little bit. We are totally on board with the fact that phones are really bad for the kids. And they do create a huge distraction in the classroom. Don't get us wrong on that. And yet, it is the only protection that students have right now against the indoctrination. And the indoctrination is going underground right now. Not underground as far as it's not going to be taught. It's just going to be more stealthily taught, and yet more blatant at the same time. But there won't be anybody in the school that will be able to expose it now if this passes. So do you understand the predicament with passing this bill? This is a global bill. It is being pushed from the OECD, from the WEF, from the CDC. All of them are on board with this because they know that the global transformation of education is almost complete. And these kids will be indoctrinated into the world ideology, and they can't have that get out.
Laurel.
I think this bill, when I heard them speaking about it, I think it was the Senate committee that we listened to it in. They bring all these people that are like, this is so good, all of our friends are not on their cell phones now.
Policy project.
You know, and they brought them from all over the state. But they didn't talk about the language, and we brought up that, this is like a global thing. And one of the senators just joked and said, yeah, this is run by the UN or UNESCO, right?
He was mocking Monica's public comment because Monica said where it came from. And then they just mocked her.
Because like you were saying, the third lane never gets spoken or never really gets attention in the fact that the writing of the language of the bill is the problem. It's
Right.
not
Yes.
the idea that the cell phones could be a distraction in school. Obviously, that's true. But it's the fact that the way it's going about, and plus they still have everything on the Chromebooks, like for hours on end.
Right. They make it sound like they're saving kids from technology when what they're doing is creating a monopoly on the technology at school so that everything a child does, they can monitor and surveil and track and measure. That's what they want the children on the school's devices, that the school owns the data and can do all of their stuff with. And
Sell it too.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but I mean, this is a vendor bill. Like this bill enacts public-private partnerships where they have a fiscal note attached to the bill so that schools can buy these RFD pockets. So kids, if they bring their phone, they're required to stick them in the pocket so that there's no communication going to that phone. So if you as a parent need to talk to your kid, now I've had to talk to my children when they were enrolled in school. I've since yanked them out because the schools are just really toxic environments for kids. They don't learn what they're supposed to be learning. But, I've had it where my kid was opted out of the state assessments, the end of year state assessments. And so they sent him to the library. So he goes to the library. And then the librarian says, you need to take this assessment. And my son's like, I am opted out of assessments. What are you having me do? So as soon as the librarian, stands over him and then moves away, he calls me. Mom, what do we do? I don't know what to do. And I've had that happen on multiple occasions. Mom, they're giving me a survey. What am I supposed to do? Or texting it or whatever it is.
He said, sit on your hands.
Yeah, sit on your hands. I will call the principal right now. But if they didn't have their phone where they could text me, then, and ask me, because kids, in those situations, they don't have your experience. They're scared that if they do something wrong or if they defy their teacher, they're going to get in trouble. They're not troublemakers, right? They just don't want to do what they feel instinctively, what their conscience tells them is not correct. And so we can't cut that off, and yet we're cutting that that line of communication off when we have a bill like this, because then, the schools can say, well, that's illegal. It's not just against school policy. You having your phone during school hours is illegal unless we tell you you can have it.
Okay, this is the crazy part of the bill, is it says it's illegal, but then it says the districts can change it as needed, right? They can make exceptions as needed. So why do we have a law? Is it illegal or is it not? Like, it's on its face, that makes for a bad bill. And to Laurel's point, if you were up there for the committee hearing, all the people in red showed up. It's the policy project. They're the ones behind it. They were also behind the period project. They're behind the school lunch and breakfast being paid for all students.
Teen Center
they're
project.
behind the teen centers. These are all way out of the lane for the proper role of government, and they're using your taxpayer dollars to usurp the role of the families, and to take away private property, which is the phones, right? If the parent wants their child to have a phone, there's a reason. And, parents should be doing their job, and the more parents cede that authority to the schools, the less parental rights they will have. Like, we can give lip service to parental rights all day long and the fact that we're fighting for them. But if we just turn our kids over to the system and we allow them to make the rules for us, that's a problem. And we lose.
What about emergencies in the schools too? If there's a shooting or something.
Yes.
Oh, they say, well, if there's an emergency, then they can have access to their phones. But if their phones are at the back, hanging on a wall in the pockets, and they, chances are they're going to have a hard time getting them when they need them.
Yeah. Laurel?
The thing I noticed on that, I was on Zoom for that meeting, and every comment I heard, like, this guy was from Logan, this guy was from Davis County, this guy was from, and I was like, it sounds like it's a grassroots thing, right? But the coordination and the, dialogue was, after I heard they're all in red, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Okay.
They handpicked and put people up there so
Well,
they could get there.
they have their teen activists that they bring out too, that are part of the policy project. So these are paid youth that they bring up there or volunteers, whether they're paid or not, I don't know. But they are part of this activist group, and this is what the schools call civic engagement. They promote this among students, and they get credit for being civically engaged, meaning we've got more and more, we've got youth coming up and testifying in these committee hearings for these activist agendas. And so you have kid after kid going up there saying, please take my phone away. Please take my phone away. And you're like, how is that teaching our kids their constitutional rights?
How is it teaching them to self-regulate? It's not. And, and again, this should be a conversation between parents and their children. We should have a tag for not just globalist bills, but astroturf bills. In other words, they have the appearance of being grassroots, but it's so fake, right? And we probably should add that. David.
I'm looking at this right now, and it's laughable. The mays as opposed to the shalls.
Yeah.
Or what they're allowed to do, but what you must do. Smartwatches are gone.
Really?
They call that emerging technologies. The other thing that I saw, that classroom hours means any time during which a student receives scheduled teacher-supervised instruction that occurs in a physical or virtual classroom.
Right.
So remember all the kids at home during.
Yep.
You're not allowed to record the stuff you're seeing on that. That was my pastime. That's the only way I made it through the pandemic, was watching all the stupid stuff the kids were recording of what their teachers were doing on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that you just, the more you look into it, the worse it looks.
And the more you look at these bad bills.
Yeah.
The point about the emergencies.
Yes.
Well, so you may be allowed to have it, you're not allowed to use it or turn. I don't know what. There's other stupid stuff in here.
Right.
But the other thing I learned from the pandemic was the number of. I won't use the name that people always use for it, but these busybodies that are going to get in there and say, hey, so and so, and so they're going to be snitching each other off while they talk about
Yeah.
the resentments, of
Right.
the kids that you're going to have. Somebody's got
Yeah.
a phone,
Yeah.
and if they've got a phone, what you've just done is given the school, quote unquote, probable cause to go and wreck through that kid's belongings,
Yes.
and
Because it can be considered contraband at that point. Yeah. So Tammy,
It's still just for public school and not private school.
this is just for public school. Yeah.
Which
so,
includes charter.
which includes yeah. Yeah. Not that, but if you're, that we know of students who take classes through the state online education program, which are online classes that are often offered through the private schools. And so when that happens, your child, for all intents and purposes, becomes a public education student.
Right. Well, and one other thing from this is certain students they can make exceptions for it if they have an IEP or a 504 plan that requires them to have their phone for a reason. So, but most kids, the other kids don't know they have a plan. So they'll just see that one kid has a phone, and that kid's going to get targeted for having a phone, right? And so it's just, there's so many problems, and you can see them all up there.
IEP is going to become the new marijuana card.
Right? You just get an IEP so you can have a phone. Yeah. So HB 447, this is being run by Speaker Mike Schultz. It's Catalyst Centers in schools. It sounds like super fancy. What is that? What is a Catalyst Center? Basically, it's these physical facilities, and they push students. These are to create these like work in school environments where outside industries come in, outside corporations, and they can be nonprofit, for-profit, whoever the schools decide to partner with, and they come in and they say, these are the types of jobs that we're going to need to fill in the future, and so we're going to create a little center here in these Catalyst Centers so you can train your kids in the food hospitality industry. We need chefs, guys. We're going to have a lot of tourists. We need chefs. So,
Or any of the CTE areas. CTE, it focuses on the trades, which are not bad in and of themselves. But when that becomes the major option for kids, or the only option, and they're being pressured to pick one of those pathways and get their first credential for that pathway while they're still in high school, and then they're being pulled out of school to go to the Catalyst Center to learn a trade while they're in school. Parents think it sounds wonderful. Oh, my kid is guaranteed success. They're going to have a job before they even graduate. But what are they missing? What education are they missing that foundational academics that they should have gotten, that they may never have the chance to get again in their lives once they are in the workforce, right? This is dumbing down their potential, while making it look like they're advancing because it's happening at such a young age. But they're going to be capped fairly young, and they won't have an opportunity to necessarily switch once they're in a pathway. And they decide, once they get old enough and realize, I really don't like this, and I would really like a do-over, but I would have to go back to high school to enter one of those pathways again, because they've monopolized or they've co-opted all pathways for all jobs. In one of our committee meetings, when I was on the board in standards and assessment, we talked about this. And I said, what about students that want to just chart their own way? They don't want to go into a pathway. And they said, well, I said, what if there's something they want to create or do on their own that's not even created yet? They're like, well, what? What hasn't been created? I'm like, well, I don't know, because it hasn't been created, right? But they were like, well, tell us, what it is, because I think we've covered all of them in our pathways.
So if they had only trained, for instance, if they had only trained us in the schools for what was existing, in terms of career options as kids, there was no internet when I was going through high school. There was no such thing. I get out of high school and suddenly there's this thing called the internet. And that's actually what I ended up kind of going into. But to imagine being trained only for one thing and then to have technologies develop, or to have the workforce shift in different directions, or just because, you get trained in something doesn't necessarily mean you stay there, right? Lots of people people want to move and explore and try different things. They grow as people. They discover what they were interested in when they were 13 is not what they're interested in now. I was an English major. I went into teaching school, and then I left and I went into technical writing, and then I got involved in this school stuff. And it's just funny how life takes you where you need to be. But imagine having this sunk cost mentality. And the sunk cost fallacy basically says, oh, I've invested so much, I have to continue investing, even if it's a bad investment. And really, that's the kind of corner that they're pushing these kids into, because just because the workforce demands it doesn't mean you necessarily want to do it. But they'll, look at a kid, they'll analyze their psychometric, characteristics and say, well, you're really good at math. You should go into this.
But this is an exploitation bill too.
Oh, yeah.
When I first heard all this, I was looking in 2008 at Obama's stuff on the White House, and I started researching in Germany. I said, when they're 10.
Yeah.
We're following that same path.
And that's what this sounds like.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Yes.
we're spinning it as a freedom and a success thing instead of the bondage that it really is. They're trying to create a seamless pipeline from preschool, which starts at 0 in the literature, 0 to 6, P through 16, 20, which is MW, which is, so the P20W is the workforce pipeline, or the cradle to career. And then it goes beyond that to lifelong learning, which means all of us will be incorporated into this new system where you have to, and with the digital currency, this is a whole nother thing. Learning is earning, and earning is learning. It's like the reverse. It's like a cyclical, earning is learning and learning is earning, right? And you have to earn your credentials, or doors of opportunity stay locked to you. So it's a gamification of life. And if you want access is a big thing to those opportunities that they provide, that they decide, then you have to go through their system. So God help the homeschoolers or those that refuse to be a part of the system.
That's what they did in Germany, made it illegal to homeschool. So that's if we're going to adopt this, that's what.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet everybody is so excited about this and thinks it's like, so they call it innovation. That's all they have to do is slap the word innovative on it, and success. And, the success sequence is another thing that is being pushed right now, which sounds good. It's like you go to school, you graduate, you get a full-time job, and you get married. That's the secret. Those are the 3 secret ingredients to being successful, which on a superficial level, yes, that's good. Like, we want kids to get educated. We want them to be able to have careers where they can sustain themselves and their families. And we want them to get married before they have children. But that success sequence also matches up with their pipeline, their seamless pipeline. And, they want you to have a full-time job before you get married. That means all women will be in the workforce.
So when did workforce, because my daughter's 16, and in kindergarten, I'll never forget being at a charter school, and on the back of a little kindergarten thing, it said workforce. And I was like,
Department of Workforce Services is one of the federal agencies that is deeply intertwined with education.
That was, I don't know, but it got a lot of steam under Obama. The Department of Labor last year held this major conference that was all centered on education. We went to the National Social Emotional Learning Conference held by Castle, who sets the national international standards for social emotional learning, and half of theirs was about durable workforce skills or competencies. So half of their presentations were around this. Like, this is such it is a behemoth. It is a leviathan. We are talking, there are lots of really profit motive, there are a lot of profit motives going on here. And you said, Tammy, you said something to the extent of, they're going to make it illegal basically to homeschool. Not only will they make it illegal, they'll make it impossible. Because they don't have to make it illegal.
Your child just won't have any opportunity or options if they don't go through the system. So they technically won't have to make it illegal to make it untenable.
Yeah, my son became a lifeguard, and he went and got his lifeguard training at the pool, the local rec center pool. Now we have Melissa Ballard, who's pushing through a bill that says training for lifeguards and for swim instructors should take place in the schools.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Well, and not only that, it allows the government to pick winners and losers in industry.
Yeah. So
Like who they partner with, and other businesses, small businesses, will just be
yeah.
a thing of the past.
By the way, this bill, the price tag on it is $65 million to begin with. This
And
one,
that's for the pilot program.
yep.
And this starts, you're saying it starts in elementary, in kindergarten?
With college and career readiness, it is one of the major parts of the state board strategic plan. And so,
And they start talking to children young and early. They say it's never too early to start thinking about what you want to do. Right, and Department of Workforce Services are the main driver of grants and research grants for preschool.
yeah. So let's move on to HB 281, Substitute 2, which is Stephanie Grecius. This is Health Curriculum and Procedures Amendments. This is the one we've been really being allowed on, and people were finally listening, but we got so much pushback because all these very high-profile groups and organizations
Conservative groups that we're friends with.
came out and they said, no, we are already promoting this because it means that basically the argument was mental health therapy is already happening in the schools, so at least let's make the parents give permission for it. Well, imagine rephrasing that any other way. You know, they're already doing like gender affirmation surgeries in the hospitals. You know, they're already cutting off kids' chests and giving them these irreversible hormones. Let's make sure we get the parents' permission for it. And this is where parental consent goes horribly off the rails.
And yet they threw that one little shiny toy in the bill to make sure that all the parents would get behind it. When it expands, there's a lot of mental health services and supports and practices happening in the schools already, and that's what parents are really livid about, and they think this bill will stop it. So or at least that they'll have to be notified before it happens, right? But the problem is that this introduces and expands it to mental health in school, mental health therapy. So what before schools could refer out, like if a student is really struggling, they could say, hey, you know, your child seems to have some issues. You might want to go and see a specialist and make some referrals for them to go see an expert outside. Now they're bringing them in-house. And the definition or the bar for expert in this realm is super, super low, including grow your own, which is basically licensing and credentialing by the State Board of Education. They just find somebody that's already working in the schools and they kind of train them to do that.
They call that the Grow Your Own educator program. So they can basically apprentice somebody into being a social worker. They can apprentice somebody into being a
mental health therapist.
Yes. Laurel.
Yes, and all of those areas have been co-opted. The mental health therapy industry is completely hijacked with the woke. So these are like the last people on earth you want to have your kid go to, whether you give permission or not.
Yes. Laurel, you had something.
Well, one of the representatives said, this is a bill for parents and parents' rights. This is the best. I think it might have been Mary Ann Lisenby.
Yeah, they sell it as that to get all the parents behind it.
Some of this language doesn't look very good. You're leaving a lot of language for the USBE to define, and that's not good. But it was like, no, just like that comment said, but for the, this is.
We don't have the house with a broken foundation.
Approving parents' rights and parental consent in schools. And I just was like, you can just see it's such an easy go around.
Right? So they did this, split the baby with this. They threw something in for the parents so the parents would go, yay, parental consent. We're all about this bill. But really, it does so much more harm, and it should never have been there to begin with. All the mental health things that are happening in schools should never have been allowed in the first place. It is a broken foundation bill, and they are trying to build on top of it a mansion.
Yeah, schools should not be providing mental health, period, just like what Natalie said. It is not their role. Stay in your lane. You can't even teach kids academics. Right now, statewide, we are graduating almost 90% of our students, and yet fewer than half of them can read, write, or do science or math at grade level. So think about that. And then if you add on to that, you know, the fact that we have increased education spending by over 115% over the past 10 years, that last year alone, we spent $8.4 billion on education. We spent over 50% of our state budget, which is income tax, and then your property taxes included with that. Over 50% of our state budget goes to K through 12 education, as well as higher education, but K-12 is the biggest chunk of change. And then, you look at this fact that what are you paying? Almost 60% of your property taxes go to the public schools, almost 60%. And now it's like your schools are going to become these full-service medical centers.
Right.
Because parents want them?
Well, the CDC's Whole School, Whole Child, Whole Community initiative, which they've taken off the website under Trump, but it doesn't matter because they've already brought it in to everything. It's already well on its way, and it's not leaving just because he took it off, had him take it down from the website. But that, turns these schools into full-service welfare centers, and it brings in school-based health centers into all the schools, or at least into one school every, within a certain area. And within those schools, this bill requires the same loose permissions that a full-blown school-based health center would, meaning you only have to get permission before the first instance of treatment. So to meet with a mental health therapist, the parent just has to sign a paper at the beginning of the year along with all the other papers that they're signing that they don't know what they're signing. And now the student has full access to the mental health therapy. It does require that the school contact or notify the parents after they've met with the student and tell them the topic on what they talked about, but they don't have to give any details. And because there's confidentiality there between the provider and the patient, those things will never be known to the parent of what they talked about. Even if the parent says, I don't want you to talk to them about sex, I don't want you to talk to them about suicide. Do you know how many other ways they can talk about sex and suicide without talking about sex and suicide? There's infinite ways that they can get around, and in fact, based on the activist nature of many of these people that are in these positions, if you say you don't want them to talk to them about sex, that's probably what they're going to focus on.
Or get the kid to go that direction. So, yeah.
I was in North and South Korea over 30 years ago, and I was told that the philosophy was they were not going to take over America with any military. They were going to do it through education, women's issues, and environment. And I've seen it happen. I heard that myself over there. And the ideology is just treating everybody like protoplasm to be managed for their slave state. And that's really their view.
Right. That is their view. And so the question is, we have to wrap up here. What do we do about all of this? The first thing you can do is just be informed and be inspired. Don't be afraid to go where the Spirit leads you to be, and do your homework. And you'll learn if what you're researching is true or not, if you make room to be inspired. Also, while you're doing that, go wherever the truth and facts lead you, even if it's right in the middle of a big group of people who are laughing at you and making fun of you because you said that a bill was globalist. Guess what? It's good practice, because one day, your kids are going to look to you, and they're going to have to navigate even worse environments than we do right now. Especially if we don't have enough adults who are really standing up. And so, this is really important to stand your ground.
Well, and standing your ground is easy when you are going up against the enemy, right? And it's the known enemy. But when you have to call it out to your friends, that becomes really hard. But that's the true test of it, the integrity, right? Are you going to stand by what you know, even if both sides hate you? Because, we have a very small needle to thread. Truth goes right through the center of that needle, and it doesn't shift to the left or to the right. Things are very precarious, and that straight and narrow is very narrow, and both sides are either playing you or tricking you. Everything seems to be a sales job, and people are being deceived left and right as far as what things really are. And some are nefarious and some are ignorant, and some are just have a lot of wishful thinking and project their own goodness on these things, hoping that it is what they want it to be. Like, there's no malice, no ill intent in their heart. And we don't always know who those people are, but when they show themselves for who they are, you know who to trust and who not to trust. And an honest person, a person with integrity, will be grateful for the information. Yeah. And they will research it themselves to verify. And they're not going to be afraid based on who's going to like them now and who's not going to like them, and is it going to, ruin my standing? And, those are all secondary. Those are way down the list of truth needs to be our bulwark and our aim and our focus.
It's important to act publicly, and this is so that other people can take courage from your courage. That is really important, because one of our favorite videos, it's called, what is the Dancing Man or something like that. But there's a guy who's at an outdoor concert and he gets on a hill and he just starts dancing, and he kind of looks a little weird, right? And he's just doing his dance, because he looks weird because nobody else is dancing around him. Right?
Everyone's just sitting there.
Everybody's just sitting there looking at him. But then along comes the guy called the First Follower, and I think that's what the movie or the video is called, The First Follower. And the First Follower is acknowledged as an equal by the dancing guy, and they both start dancing. The First Follower is dancing like the guy on the hill, and now you have two people. Okay, so it's no longer just some lone nut on the hill. You've kind of got a movement going on, and this is the kind of thing. And then after that, more people join, and more people join, and it becomes this entire revolution.
And now if you're not dancing, something's wrong with you. The left uses this kind of strategy a lot, but there's a lot we can learn by what they've done. Like, they're very good at community organizing and banding together, and we need to band together for truth. And we need to make that cool again, and we need to make that popular again.
Unconventionality is our last point. We're all about the unconventional, the David versus the Goliath, right? Somebody would look at David and say, oh, yeah, you
don't stand a chance.
Stick with the sheep and you'll be fine. And you don't have to worry about anything. You'll be safe there. Sometimes we have to step out of our comfort zones. It's really important. Like, Natalie and I are both introverts. We hate this kind of stuff. We do not like this. This makes us hugely uncomfortable. And there isn't ever a time when we have to public speak where our hearts aren't racing. Where it just feels like, wouldn't it be nice to be at home, snuggled up, in a blanket with a book? Unfortunately, we know too much, and we'll be held accountable if we don't share it with others. And so, and that's not unfortunately, that's good. We feel like,
It's been a blessing.
Yeah,
We've grown a lot.
And I have to say, you two have given a lot of us courage to say what we believe is true.
I just had to read a bill. I mean, I looked at bills, but I'm not, because of the symbols, it's like opened my head differently.
Yes.
Okay. So that's what
good.
you're teaching.
That's good. That's what we're trying to do, right?
Yes, I remember the first time I read a bill, and I was like, in fact, it was ESSA, that every student succeeds at, which is like 2,000 pages, and somebody was like, rallied everybody together, and they're like, okay, everybody take a piece to read, and I was like, okay, I can take a piece. Like, this is where I have to start, because I don't know what I'm doing. I have never looked at anything. Yeah, so everybody has to start somewhere. And then you learn line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, and then pretty soon you're up here trying to help others, and you're like, well, how did this happen?
Well, and the nice thing about being unconventional is that, they control us when we're predictable. When you're unconventional, you can't be predicted. And if you can't be predicted, you can't be controlled. And I hate to be controlled. I'm kind of like this inner, don't make me do the thing. I'm going to not do it just because you told me to do it. And so, and it's very important that we retain our autonomy and our ability to act independently. There's so much, especially right now in education, that is all centered around collaboration. These kids
Collectivism.
Collectivism and collaboration and communication with each other. They are not allowed a single independent thought. of their own. You can't work together. You can't work by yourself. No, you have to work in a group, always and forever.
Yes.
You'll never, ever leave the group.
That's like their shining star. Everybody's trying to collaborate, you know.
All the way down to redesigning schools so that they have these collaborative environments where the kids have to come out, they can see what the other kids are doing, and they can open up the doors and all the kids can come out and
Nothing
think
but
together.
distraction.
Yeah.
It makes learning harder.
Yeah, it's super teaching these kids. Groupthink is the highest virtue, and it is not.
It must be taught at the education level, because I have
Yeah.
my secondary education degree to high school, and I never once had my kids do group.
Yeah.
It's one of the,
Exactly.
it's the 4 C's turned into the 6 C's, which keep expanding. And those are the new competencies. When you hear the word competent or competencies, it doesn't mean that they know how to do something. It means collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, empathy. I mean, they've added some non-C's in there, but
Character.
it's the woke skills, the life skills, the work skills. They have a lot of different names for them, but this is part of how you earn your credentials, your badges, your tokens. In the earning is learning and learning is earning new society that they're creating.
This is our website, higherground.work, W-O-R-K. And we have a bad bills section on there, and we'll be fleshing it out. But after the legislative season is over, for us, that's when the fun has begun, because we're going to put the votes out there and we're going to educate people. Look, these are the people and this is how they voted. Get on your legislators right now. Hold them accountable. You don't go begging to them. You tell them what you expect of them, and then you hold them accountable. Just because, everybody in the legislature is about, relationship building and trying to protect their images, you're under no obligation to protect their images when they've done nothing to protect your freedoms, your family, and your faith.
Well, especially when you've educated them beforehand and you said, this is what this does, and they vote for it anyway. Civic engagement really means that we are in the know, we're paying attention, and we hold them accountable. And we don't let them forget, and we don't let other people forget, because otherwise they'll vote them in again and again. And if they're not protecting our faith, our family, our freedom, and honoring their oath of office, then they need to go. That doesn't mean we're not Christ-like. It means we value truth and accountability more than relationships. Does it mean that we go at people? Not necessarily. Sometimes you have to call people out, and it doesn't matter how you say it, if you say it nice or otherwise. If you say that somebody voted for something bad or ran something bad, they will always take it personally, unless they're a person of integrity. Like Mike Kennedy, and I can't say this across the board for all of his bills, but when I talked to him about his bill where they made it illegal to transition minors, which that's also threatened by 281 that opens up the telehealth portal to other states that can now access students if 281 passes. He told me that was the one thing that he couldn't figure out how to close up is the telehealth, because it's regulated under FCC, interstate commerce laws. And so you've got states like Washington State that has declared themselves a sanctuary state for those kind of services. And they have passed laws that make it so their providers are governed by Washington's laws, but they can reach into other states through telehealth. And what they can offer and provide to that student is based on their state law, not ours. And so you can see what a huge problem this is. And I appreciated that he was honest with me about that loophole. Like, he tried to do what he could, but he's like, I couldn't figure out how to close that up. A lot of legislators would have just buried that part, and if you had brought it up, they would have denied it, or
More often than not, they say, oh, do you really think that's happening? Oh, is it happening right now? Where's your proof? I don't see it the same way you see it. I don't see what you're seeing in it.
They have all these lines.
They have a lot of lines. We've heard them all. But at any rate, we just want to wrap up and say thank you so much for coming out tonight. We're sorry to run a little bit over on time, but we appreciate your help. And please spread the word about what we're doing, and do whatever you want to do to help magnify the message. It's well overdue for accountability when it comes to bad bills in the state of Utah. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll stick around.